Good evening, everyone. This is Michael Monty, ACSA's Executive Director. We're pleased to have you here for Focusing Your Program's Assessment, which continues ACSA's series of workshops and webinars on student and program assessment and self-assessment. I'm glad to be here with Dr. Herb Childress, who is our resident expert on assessment and has been working with us for the last 15 to 18 months to develop some programming. So these sessions are a response to feedback from our members about how ACSA can be helpful, more helpful. Student and program assessment in higher education continues to grow in importance, particularly as calls for accountability increase. If you've been in any of these sessions with Herb, you'll know that assessment is not simply what you do because you have to. It's something you do all the time, in fact, in formal and informal ways. You may or may not realize it. Assessment is a great opportunity for faculty, students, staff, and administrators alike to gain insight, to find ways to understand what's working and what doesn't. And as we will hear tonight, it is a practice that is critical to making education more equitable, giving students especially what they need to thrive in their degree programs. Without well-developed methods of assessment, you cannot effectively gain insight on how teaching, curriculum, and other activities either help or hinder different groups of people. So we started with workshops and coaching sessions last year, and over the summer, we worked with Herb to put out this book. Program Assessment in Design Education. It's now available. You can order it. It's about 110 pages or so, and it's divided into areas that can be useful for accreditation, but really larger questions about program assessment, including strategies and other references. Herb talks about some of these things in his workshops, but this is a nice, durable, always available when Herb's not reference for programs. It's available in print and in digital format. And this is our book launch party. We want to celebrate Herb for this achievement. We really appreciate the work that he's done. So congratulations, Herb. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Mike. And thanks to you and the ACSA for the opportunity to work with you on questions of assessment. The very first assessment project I worked on 20 years ago, our department had hired a consultant named Rich Haswell of Texas A&M Corpus Christi. And he'd been doing academic assessment work himself for about 10 years by that point. So he was a real pioneer. And one of the things he emphasized to us is that every good assessment project is de novo. It's done from scratch because every program is assessing things that reflect their own values, their own definitions among their own students, drawn from the interests of their own faculty. Assessment is never a recipe. It's always a design project. We can borrow inspiration from what other people have done. We can look at precedents, but in the end, we're doing work that's site-specific and responsive to unique local conditions and constraints. So what we're going to do this evening is to show you 3 particular examples of how individual programs have designed assessment projects that respond to their own interests and their own settings. From each school, we'll have a recorded 15-minute or so presentation. And then after we've seen all 3, we'll have a half-hour conversation with all the presenters to dig a little deeper on some of the things that we've heard and some of the things we're excited about. I'll invite you to put your questions up in the chat as an ongoing process, and we'll raise some of your questions again during that conversation. So, Mike, are we ready to go?
I think we are.
Okay, let's get ourselves underway with a presentation from the Architecture Department at the University of Oregon. We have with us this evening Michael Zaretsky, an associate professor and head of the UO Department of Architecture. He came to Oregon after serving as the director of the Architectural Engineering Program and associate professor in the Department of Civil Engineering at UT Arlington. For many years, he taught at the University of Cincinnati, where he was also the Associate Dean of Faculty Affairs and Curriculum. And as a design practitioner, he has a long record of public interest design practice in underserved communities, both domestic and international. He knows what it means to respond to local conditions. So let's launch ourselves with Michael's presentation.
Hi, everyone. I'm Michael Zaretsky. I'm head of architecture at the University of Oregon. It's great to be here and speak with you all a little bit about assessment. I showed up here as a new head of architecture in March, at the end of March this past year. So it's been an exciting 8 months of working on our accreditation. I'm going to give you a little bit of history to understand where I'm coming from with assessment and some of the experience that I bring to this. I am a UO grad. I graduated from here in '98 and then went into practice for several years in Europe and along the West Coast, and then I've been in academia for the last 17 years or so, both as a architecture professor as well as an associate dean of faculty affairs and curriculum, where I did quite a bit of work on different accreditations for a number of programs in the College of Design, Architecture, Art, and Planning at University of Cincinnati. My last role was actually Director of Architectural Engineering at the University of Texas at Arlington, where I was brought in to help lead a new architectural engineering program. It was a few years old when I got there. And a year after I got there, we had the accreditation under the Accreditation Board for Engineering and Technology, or ABET. And as an architect who had worked on NAB accreditations, it was fascinating because that's a completely assessment-based accreditation. And there was very little focus on student work. It was really based on how we were evaluating the success of what we said we were doing. And so when I saw the new 2020 conditions and procedures, there was a lot of familiarity for me with that. So when I arrived, there had already been a lot of great work that had been done here by the previous department head, Nancy Cheng, as well as all the faculty on board here at U of O. And I also learned that Judith Shine, the department head before Nancy Cheng, had also done a lot of work related to this. So they've been incredibly helpful in this process. We have a number of amazing faculty here, Allison Kwok and others who are really highly recognized educators who are a huge part of writing everything. And as I said, a lot of work had been done, but it was really clear that the assessment piece was really not fully integrated into the work that had been done. We attended the Herb Childress workshop actually last February, which was incredibly helpful and kicked off a lot of important work with the faculty about assessment. When I came on, I put together a team with Judith and Nancy and Peter Keys and others. And we started looking at the matrix, which I'll go through. We also looked at a number of different assessments that we had done with the university, different kinds of reviews that they had done that required us to look at our program in different ways to see what would be helpful. We realized that we're going to need a lot of input to properly guess this assessment. So as we went through our PCs and SCs, we organized teams of faculty to work on each of those. We also did a lot of reaching out to career services, student services, institutional research, all across the university, our associate deans here in the college, others in the provost's office, to get help and assistance, and especially for data that ended up being really important. We had a lot of discussions about what we could quantitatively assess and what we were already qualitatively assessing in our program, because like most programs, we had a sense of what we're doing well and what we're not doing well in educating our students and preparing them for practice. But we did not have a lot of quantitative assessment embedded. There's an interesting culture of evaluation at the University of Oregon. They recently switched all course evaluations to a qualitative assessment. So there's actually a move away from quantitative assessment at the university as a whole for a number of reasons that relate to equity and to some real questions about how typical student evaluations are working. So there's a general sort of focus away from quantitative assessment, but a lot of what we're doing is attempting to collect quantitative forms of assessment. I'll talk a little bit more about that as I dive into the particular things we're assessing. We did realize that we needed external inputs. So we quickly organized, we're on a quarter system. So I was starting in our spring quarter and our students graduate at the end of spring. We quickly organized a graduating student self-assessment survey that was basically listing the 14 PCs and SCs and asking the students to evaluate how well prepared they feel they are in each of those different areas. And that ended up being quite interesting, actually, and something we'll probably build on as we move forward. We also began the formation of an architecture advisory group. There's already a Dean's Advisory Council for the college, but there's no specific architecture advisory group to provide input on our program and curriculum. There's a lot of amazing alumni who we are in dialogue with, but I had done this at UTA where I brought in leaders from firms we wanted our students to be going to get their input on our program and curriculum. And so I began the formation of that advisory group here, and that's been phenomenally helpful and informative to get that input, as well as obviously just going out and meeting with firms in the region, getting their input. I'm gonna go ahead and pull up some of the documentation that we use here. So let me start with this one. All right, so this is the PC and SC matrix. Can you see that? I'm assuming you can.
Yes, we can.
Great. So we have both an accredited B-ARC and an M-ARC track 1 and track 2. So essentially 2 accredited programs, but 3 different curricula. And so we started with this. And for those who were working on this last spring, you might remember that originally this document included just the 14 PCs and SCs, and then the shared values were added later. And so when we were putting this together, adding all our courses, required, non-required, as well as our non-curricular activities, one of the things that we discussed was that there are things on here that are what we're referring to as indirect assessments, places where we're looking in the curriculum or program to get feedback, but we are not collecting data from them. And we're representing those with O's, as you can see throughout here. And then the places where we are directly assessing courses or non-curricular activities, we're using the X's. I have not gotten official approval from NAB for this, but I'm hoping that they're understanding of that decision. We also made a decision that the shared values, which are here at the top, we are not going to do direct assessments of the shared values. There's many places that we are indirectly or qualitatively assessing those throughout our program. And these are also fully embedded throughout the PCs and SCs. So all of the PCs and SCs have direct assessments, but the shared values do not. I'm not going to go into all the details of this, but I just wanted to explain how we're approaching that. And again, clarifying that we did have to separate this for the M-ARC track 1 and the M-ARC track 2. This document was helpful for us as a really important organizational document, but we needed to create a second document, which I will pull up now. One sec. So this is our internal document, and here we have tabs for the shared values, the PCs, SC1 through 4, and SC5 through 6. And what these have is basically going through course by course, having the faculty who've been involved or staff who've been involved, and then identifying our assessment mechanism for each of these. And then what is our specific benchmark for our undergrads and for our grads? And then in some cases, there's additional benchmarks that we're looking at. So if we take the design PC2, we have many courses that are part of that. We're looking at the grade for the final studio assessment. I should have mentioned earlier, we don't have grades for studio at the University of Oregon. That's something that has been in place pedagogically for years, based on trying to create an atmosphere that is not competitive and allows exploration and encourages group work. So basically, for an undergrad, we have set a benchmark of 80% of students passing the studio, and for grads, 90% passing the studio. And I can go, through these. They get more specific. Let's say for research and innovation, we have a series of courses, Human Context of Design, or ECS 1 and 2. And we're looking at, in this case, specific projects, certain exam questions. It gets much more specific for certain courses. For SCs 1 through 4, these also start to get more specific in certain cases where we've got exam questions, exam grades, lab activities, etc. And then for SC 5 and 6, where we're providing student work, we have our specific courses and names, and then final studio assessment. But this is really helpful for all of us, this document, because it does allow us to see everything that we are assessing specifically. We can reach out to faculty and identify where they are in here and ask them to provide the information. I'm going to show you also where they provide that information. One of the things to be aware of is this process, identifying the assessment mechanisms and the benchmarks, is tricky. And we recognize that this first year of doing this is really, it's a bit of a shot in the dark. It is based on, a lot of informed discussions, but we're currently collecting that data as we look at the courses from last year, and I'll show you how we're collecting that data, but we're really evaluating whether we're assessing the right things and what we're learning from it. Are our benchmarks accurate? Because obviously, if every student has achieved something, we're not learning a lot. We're not learning about where we need to improve. There's a document that we created. Let me find this here. One sec. So this document idea comes directly from what I learned at UTA. I had a wonderful chair of civil engineering, Dr. Sayed Ali Abamali, who was like a pro at accreditation. He had been through many, many ABET accreditations, and he really knew that process well. And what he had set up was for every assessment, you had a document such as this, where you were capturing the information you needed, understanding what is your what's the specific PC, what's your enrollment, obviously term, instructor, course information, and then what is the assessment mechanism type. And we have test questions, assignment or project, a group of assignments, or final course grade. And then we get a description of that. And we later put this in a Qualtrics survey so that we can collect that data. And actually, later today, I'm going to be looking through that data with a group of faculty who are on an assessment committee. But I think we all wonder if this first pass through that data is going to elicit a lot of information. We certainly have had a lot of important discussions about where we're measuring things in our curriculum, but I actually think it's probably going to take a few cycles of going through this process to identify where we can productively assess successes of the PCs and SCs across the curriculum. So that's the basic information I have about assessment here at the University of Oregon Department of Architecture. Michael, is there anything else you think I should add or go into greater detail on?
How about equity and justice and the ways in which that is being emphasized in the curriculum?
Sure. So we had a lot of conversations about how diversity, equity, inclusion, justice can be assessed in the curriculum and in the program. We have a Department of Equity and Inclusion at the university, and I have multiple discussions with them. We have institutional research, and we talked a lot about demographic data that's being collected and looked through. We have done a tremendous amount in recent years on sort of many fronts. We are in a program that has historically not been as diverse as we want it to be in terms of faculty, in terms of students. We actually have a fairly diverse staff at this point. We've increased gender diversity of faculty. We have rough equivalency of gender in terms of our students, but we're really looking to increase diversity of the student population across the whole. When we look at our data from the last few years, there's a number of things we've done that has had significant success in our undergraduate program. We've actually increased, almost doubled the percentage of BIPOC students in our population in the last 5 years. We've had some increases in our graduate program, but not as significant. A lot of this has been based on scholarships that we've been able to bring in for BIPOC students, and as well as additional recruiting and outreach that we've been doing. The question is, how do we measure success there? And again, we've sort of come up with certain percentages. We're trying to increase those numbers. We're looking at those numbers. We had a lot of conversations about, are we trying to match numbers in terms of percentages of population locally or statewide or across the US or across architecture programs or across the profession? Sort of what are our comparators there? And we looked at a lot of different data points for that. So we have some specific criteria we're moving towards, but we're going to be looking at that really closely. I will say one thing that we did that's had a huge impact, and we're looking closely at this, is our Spatial Justice Fellows Initiative that was started 3 years ago under school director Aaron Moore, who really pushed this initiative to create a program that brings in faculty for a year in a visiting faculty position, typically, who bring in outside perspectives, whether from practice or from academia. And they come and teach with us, and they do some research, they do presentations, they engage with our faculty, staff, and students. And we've done student surveys about how this has impacted their experience here, and the responses have been phenomenal. We've also looked at students when they accept to come to U of O. We asked them why, and we've had a large number that have said they're coming here specifically for that program. So we're seeing that investing in bringing outside perspectives into the program is increasing enrollment for sure. But this is certainly something where I'm always interested in hearing from others at other programs about how they're assessing DEI issues in their program and in their curriculum.
Thank you, Michael. That was really terrific. I'm looking forward to talking with you as part of our conversation. Our second presentation is from the University of Washington by Rick Mohler, Associate Professor of Architecture at the UW College of Built Environments. Rick is a fellow of the American Institute of Architects, won a 2020 R&D award from Architect Magazine, along with a collaborator in city planning for a project focused on accessory dwelling units. He also won a 2021 ACSA AIA Housing Design Education Award for his Neighborhoods for All research design studio and seminar, taught in collaboration with the Seattle Planning Commission. That course addressed the social inequities of single-family zoning policy. So again, someone attuned to the local specifics. Let's see Rick's presentation.
Coming up.
Good evening. I'm Rick Mohler, and I'm delighted to be here to share what we've been doing regarding assessment, and especially to learn from colleagues. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Architecture in the College of Built Environments at the University of Washington, where I teach design studio and professional practice. And from 2015 to 2018, I served as the graduate program coordinator. I also have about 35 years of experience in practice as well as in teaching. So I'll start with the context within which we work. So we are located in Seattle, which is the country's 18th largest city and among its fastest growing cities, with rapidly rising housing costs and the third largest population of people experiencing homelessness. As a result, issues of equity, diversity, and inclusion are palpable and visible all around us, and we leverage the city as our laboratory. The university campus is just north of downtown, and our college is housed in these two buildings. The College of Built Environments is unique in that it includes the departments of architecture, construction management, landscape architecture, real estate, and urban design and planning, all under one roof. Our department offers 7 degree tracts, although the Master of Architecture degree is the only one accredited by NAB. We're a relatively small department with about 300 graduate and undergraduate students and 50 to 60 students in each graduating MArch cohort. We attract a diverse national and global student body, and our faculty hails from around the country and world as well, and my Canadian colleagues are particularly fond of this diagram. Seattle has a robust and innovative practicing community that belies Seattle's size. We're home to multiple large national firms and hundreds of regional and local practices which are garnering attention. For example, since 2003, 3 Seattle-based firms have won the AIA Firm Award. Geographically, we're the only accredited U.S. architecture program within 175 miles. And while the University of British Columbia is closer, it's in a different country. As a result, if a local practitioner is interested in engaging in an architectural education, we are the only option, and this is a distinction we strive to leverage. One way we do this is by maintaining an active and engaged Professionals Advisory Council, or PAC. Established in 1995, it has roughly 30 firms at any given time and meets monthly with the departmental administration on campus. The PAC supports the department by providing student scholarships and internships for our 3-year MArch students, organizing combined departmental and professional events, sponsoring student-led initiatives, and by serving as an advisor to the department regarding curricular revisions and, in this case, an emerging assessment protocol. In February of this year, our college adopted a new strategic framework under the leadership of Renee Cheng, who entered as dean in 2019. The vision for the framework is an increased focus on the intersection of climate, social equity, and the built environment, with an emphasis on interdisciplinary engagement to better leverage the college's unique assets and resources. As the framework is just now being implemented, the MARC program has the opportunity to use it as an assessment measure for its own curriculum moving forward. Similarly, we substantially revised our MARC curriculum in 2018, in part to strengthen our focus on climate and social equity issues, which is very much in alignment with the vision of the college framework. We restructured it as 4 curricular building blocks: foundation, integration, exploration, and research. We removed the thesis requirement, introduced research studios and seminars, and better integrated design studio and companion coursework in key areas of the curriculum. Our 3-year MARC students enter at the beginning of year 1, while the 2-year students enter at the start of year 2. The second 2 quarters of the integration block at the start of year 2 are critical for accreditation, as these are the only 2 quarters of specific coursework and required coursework that the entire cohort must take. This can be seen in our program NAB assessment matrix, in which a significant number of program and student criteria are embedded in the 2nd and 3rd quarters of the integration block. This is addressed via a 2-part cohort-wide studio sequence in which all students in each of 4 studios are assigned the same project on 4 different sites in a 2-block area in both the fall and winter quarters. In the fall quarter, students design a mixed-use multifamily housing project, while in the winter they design a small-scale institutional project with a community focus adjacent to the housing project on the same site. The studio is closely integrated with the companion technology class. Between the 2 studios, students are tasked with untangling a regulatory environment that spans from zoning codes stemming from the city's urban growth strategy to accessibility codes impacting site and building development, but all viewed through the lens of social equity and inclusion. Sustainability strategies are developed to a diagrammatic level in the fall, but given the smaller scale of the building assigned in the winter, a higher level of resolution is expected. As a result, the studio is intended to address PC8, Social Equity and Inclusive Environments, SC1, Health, Safety and Welfare, SC3, Regulatory Context, SC5, Design Synthesis, and SC6, Building Integration, in addition to the typical design studio criteria. The studios invite a number of guest speakers and critics in addition to those invited to midterm and final reviews. Among them is Karen Breitmeyer, a nationally recognized accessibility consultant and recipient of the 2019 AIA Whitney M. Young Jr. Award. Working with students in small groups, she frames ADA code compliance as an essential component of equity, diversity, and inclusion. Karen also serves as an external assessor regarding students' grasp of the issue and the evidence of it in their work. In developing an assessment strategy, we started by doing what departments typically do. We established a committee. The committee is comprised of faculty representing design, history, theory, and technology curricula, and is working closely with the department chair, graduate program coordinator, and Anne-Marie Boris, who's leading the APR effort. The committee participated in 2 ACSA assessment workshops with Herb Childress. On a tight time frame, the committee released a report for administration, faculty, staff, and professional advisory council consideration. Organized into 3 sections, the report provided an overview of the NAB criteria, a description of NAB's shift from evaluation of the program itself to one of the program's assessment protocol as a tool for continuous improvement, the role of data in the process, recommendations for individual faculty assessment of courses, and recommendations for the department in establishing an assessment culture. Committee recommendations include establishing a consistent framework for all course syllabi and quantitative assessment for courses, including the student success rate of course completion. The committee also recommended establishing an external assessment infrastructure to leverage our strong connections with the practicing community, an internal assessment structure at multiple levels, and strategies for iterative evaluation and improvement. External assessment of design studio work by visiting reviewers by criteria was seen as an obvious way to leverage the dozens of critics passing through the department each quarter. Other potential external assessment strategies include external peer review of course syllabi, leveraging existing PAC programs, including the Student Portfolio Review and student internship programs, and better tracking of student award programs and competitions in which the department has traditionally done well. Internal assessment opportunities for non-studio courses were less obvious, but recommendations include assigning faculty to studio reviews, which is something we've long discussed but have not implemented until now. Course presentations to faculty in the interest of refreshing course content, and organizing annual or biannual department retreats focused on assessment progress and opportunities. The tight time frame prompted the swift implementation of several recommendations upon release of the report. External assessment tools for Design Studio were beta tested initially in several studios as an early step in the process. These were provided to reviewers as fillable PDFs with questions based on primary and secondary program and student criteria, with a section for comments and recommendations. The PDFs were later replaced with online surveys launched by the department but built by the instructors, so that the data would be uploaded directly to the department. And the comments section was refined to elicit a response focused on areas of potential improvement as recommended by Herb Childress. The department then launched a faculty self-assessment platform organized by NAB criteria for all courses with prescribed criteria content based upon the department's matrix. Faculty provide the course catalog description and assessment of student outcomes per the criterion and the metrics used in the assessment. Faculty also include examples of evidence used in the assessment process. The assessment committee then, on a regular basis, reviews a limited number of criteria on a course-by-course basis as directed by the department. Individual committee members first conduct the review, followed by an assessment by the committee as a whole with proposed recommendations for specific course improvement. Based upon the review of individual course assessment, the committee then provides an assessment of the program's fulfillment of the criterion and identifies areas of strength, areas of weakness, potential gaps, and opportunities to be leveraged. So what are we learning along the way? Well, we didn't start with a clear and overarching structure, as I would love to say that we did. Instead, we first identified opportunities to leverage what we were already doing, but to do what we're doing, to more rigorously assess the relationship between learning objectives, student outcomes, and NAB criteria with specific assessment tools. We then expanded upon those tools to develop an emerging assessment protocol, which includes a departmental assessment infrastructure and culture. More than half of what is listed here has been implemented to date, but all of it is subject to change as we continue to discover what is most effective. The dynamic context within which we are working, including a recently revised curriculum and new college strategic plan, has posed challenges, as has the tight schedule within which we need to respond to NAB expectations. Now, this has been complicated by COVID, as Chair Kate Simonen took the helm just as all of this was coming to a head. On the other hand, this process affords an ideal opportunity to evaluate the success of our revised MARC curriculum now and our response to the new college strategic framework moving forward. We believe that it can foster greater curricular transparency and collaboration as well. And the short timeline has encouraged the department to quickly implement and evaluate assessment strategies in a matter of weeks or months, as opposed to the years that such an effort often entails. So thanks very much, and I look forward to the conversation.
Rick, again, thank you. Wonderful ideas for us to consider in our coming conversation. Again, I want to remind people that you are welcome to toss questions up during these presentations. We will harvest those questions and raise them with our panelists at the end. We're coming to our third and final presentation of the evening from the Boston Architectural College. The BAC has two presenters tonight. Bethany Ludendale-Garver is the BAC's Dean and Faculty of Practice and Director of Applied Learning. In those roles, she leads college-wide efforts to connect education with practice through reflective assessment and experiential learning initiatives. Her own research and teaching focus on urban design, community engagement, design pedagogy, and professional practice. She's a licensed architect with more than 15 years of professional experience and is the founder of BLG Architecture, LLC, a transdisciplinary research and design studio. Beth currently serves on the board of directors of the American Institute of Architecture Students as the ACSA liaison, and was previously an at-large director for the ACSA. With her tonight is Kelly Josephson, the BAC's Associate Vice President for Data and Analytics. She brings extensive experience in higher education leadership with expertise in strategic data analytics. Prior to joining the BAC, Dr. Josephson was the Dean of Strategic Planning and Institutional Research at Northern Essex Community College, where she launched a data warehouse and visual analytics platform. Using the data from those systems, she facilitated dialogues with faculty and staff around equity-minded teaching, learning, and student support services. Those teams use data-centered inquiry to analyze and reform policies, practices, and teaching techniques that were underserving their students. So let's go on into the BAC's presentation.
Hi, everyone. I'm Beth Ludendale-Garver, Dean of Practice at the Boston Architectural College. Today, I'm co-presenting with my colleague, Kelly Josephson, the BAC's Associate Vice President for Data and Analytics. We'll be talking about how we are leveraging data to engage in collaborative, equity-minded inquiry for continuous improvement and purposeful action. Since our founding in 1889, the Boston Architectural College has been a trailblazing heart of spatial design education. Our mission is to provide excellence in design education emerging from practice and accessible to diverse communities. How are we accessible? We're open enrollment. We offer more than 10 transfer-friendly degrees. Half our students are people of color. Our students earn an income working in more than 100 design firms, and we have ambitious plans to grow within the next 5 years. Now I'll turn it over to Kelly to set the stage for equity-minded inquiry.
Thanks, Beth, for introducing our presentation and for asking me to co-present. So I'm new to the architecture space and I'm learning so much. As background, I've worked in higher education all of my career in Canada, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, and now the US. I've worked at large four-year institutions, at technical vocational schools, at a community college in Massachusetts, and now at the Boston Architectural College since July of this year. So preparing for this session, I reviewed the NAB 2020 conditions for accreditation, my attention was drawn to the prevalence of equity and social justice as a value and as a program criteria. So this is an important consideration for those of us in the data and analytics space and is more important now than ever. And so our thoughts today will center around fostering a culture of data-informed decision-making with equity at the heart. So there are three areas that Beth and I want to touch on in setting the stage for data-informed equity work. So they are people, culture, and, well, data. My experience is when these are considered intentionally together, there's a real sweet spot for equity work. So let's start with people. People matter, and they are at the heart of equity work. We can get very engaged in the science of data, but often overlooked and crucial to meaningful analysis is empathy. So there are many sort of data mindsets. Paramount for me is understanding and engaging stakeholders in the analyses. Data points aren't just numbers, especially in our work. They represent people, our students, our graduates, our colleagues, our community partners. So I want to bring data to life and ensure that context is actively considered. Our students, faculty, staff, and other stakeholders have that context. I really like the phrase, don't do anything about me without me. And that's top of mind when I work with data and with people. Data is a great tool to create awareness of what's happening, especially if we disaggregate. So I look for ways to use the story of data to create awareness of issues. My goal is to create awareness without judgment, especially in the equity work. So to foster a space that sparks curiosity, questions, and conversation, but not fear. And this safe space is not always comfortable, and it's not meant to be. So I look not to create a sense of urgency. We all have enough pressure and stress these days, but rather to create a sense of purpose and passion. An example of creating awareness, at the last college where I worked, Northern Essex Community College, we had a goal to close the equity gap between our Hispanic students and our non-Hispanic students. And we'd been working on this for years, but didn't seem to be making any notable progress. So we created a deep data dive team that included faculty and staff to mine the data for better understanding, again, with empathy at the heart. Our focus was to understand where we were not serving our students well. The group focused on the classroom experience of our students because students told us that is where the biggest impact of their experience was. And what we found in the data was a lot of variation and a lot that was getting hidden in the aggregate. So we focused in to start with on successful course completion rates of our students. So for us, that was the percentage of students who achieved a grade of C or higher in a course. This was familiar to our faculty and was our most important leading indicator for our equity work. At an all-staff meeting, we presented some potentially difficult data, but again, our focus was simply on building awareness. So we showed the overall successful course completion rates for our students, which was 72.6%. We then showed how that differed for our Hispanic students at 68.5% and our non-Hispanic students at 75.4%. So this was a 6.8% equity gap for our Hispanic students, and it showed that we obviously had work to do. So we dove deeper. We showed this slide that mapped all of our classes in a fall semester. We highlighted that while the average successful course completion rate was 72.6%, depending on the classes that students took, they either had a 25% chance of successfully completing or 100% chance of successfully completing a course, or anywhere in between there. So this was a difference at the extremes of 75%. So we then walked people through visualizations of how course completion rates varied by our schools, programs, different subject areas, and courses within the subject areas. Towards the end of the presentation, we took one course that had 17 sections in the same semester. We didn't use any names or labels for the course, so let's just say it was Anthropology 101, which it wasn't. And we looked at the successful course completion rate for all 17 sections of that same course. So the section with the lowest successful course completion rate was 32% on the left-hand side, and the highest was 85%. So a variation in exactly the same course in the same semester of 53%. We were curious then to look at the equity gap for that same course. So we mapped the difference in successful course completion rates for our Hispanic students compared to other students for all 17 of the sections. And this was really the heart of our presentation. And the room went quiet. So here you can see that there is one section where there was parity. There were 5 sections where the course served Hispanic students at a higher rate than non-Hispanic students. And a larger number of sections where Hispanic students were not being served well by the course compared to other students, and in some cases, much less well served. The presentation at the all-staff meeting stirred up both interest and trepidation, but above all, there was a desire for much further exploration. So people matter: empathy, context, and curiosity without judgment. Which brings me to culture and how we choose to work together and to work with data from an equity-minded lens. Wanting to foster a culture of curiosity, I used Tableau to connect to our data warehouse and provided each faculty member with their own dashboard of their course completion data over time, disaggregated by race, ethnicity. So this is an example of one of the views. It shows the instructors the successful course completion rates for all of the classes that they taught over time. And the yellow line shows the average rate for all instructors teaching that course that semester. When they hovered over the bars, they were able to see the breakdown by Hispanic and non-Hispanic students. And I did change this to show all race ethnicity groups, just to ensure that all students were being seen. There's a visualization for the equity gap for each section, along with the average equity gap for all the instructors teaching that course that semester, which was indicated by the blue reference line. Another view showed grade distribution. And again, a hover showed how this was different for their course for race ethnicity groups. And so the instructors used this data to consider such questions as what patterns did they see in the data? What were their hunches about what was happening? What additional data did they want to collect to understand the equity gap? What equity-minded questions might they pursue with further inquiry? My philosophy with this is that the more people that have data in their hands, the better. And I always made myself available to work with instructors and to work with course teams or department teams through an equity-minded data process. There's a beautiful set of work done by the University of Southern California Center for Urban Education, which focuses on equity-mindedness. So the term equity-mindedness refers to a perspective or a mode of thinking of instructors who call attention to patterns of inequity in student outcomes. So these instructors are willing to take personal and institutional responsibility for the success of their students and critically reassess their own practices. So equity-minded instructors are race conscious and aware of the social and historical context of exclusionary practices in higher education. So it encourages equity-minded questions such as, how do I engage my students? And how do I pay attention to who by race and ethnicity? And who's regularly speaking and being celebrated in my classroom? And what do I do if I find an equity gap? This is opposed to the more sort of deficit-minded questions about how students are not prepared or are not committed. Again, rather, what does the data tell us about our own teaching and learning environment? And it's about what we can do as an institution to serve our students better. And at NECC, before we really focused too much on the data and taking action, we spent a lot of time learning and getting focused on this equity mindset. This work is the purview of faculty, and my role is simply as a facilitator and a data and a team coach if needed. So we had great collaboration with our professional development office and with faculty and with our data team. So the work that I've done with Beth in the practice department is a great example of using the tenets of equity-mindedness with data. So I'm just going to turn it over to Beth to talk about how she's been working with data recently.
Thanks, Kelly. I'm pleased to share an example of how assessment data for my program has evolved by using data for action. First, our data tracks student learning outcomes gained in experiential work-based learning settings. By aggregating this data, I can look for equity gaps. This inquiry leads us to insight. As we ask more questions, we gain insights about who else we need to see the data and what other resources are needed for our program to improve. These insights are prompting action as we continually strive to increase awareness among our people, including BAC faculty and firm partners. Practice component data is generated through regular one-on-one assessment meetings between BAC students and adjunct practitioner faculty. Students demonstrate what they are learning in practice by sharing and presenting incremental reflective essays, self-assessments, portfolio evidence, and supervisor evaluations. Student competency is evaluated by faculty using a customized experiential learning rubric. Before 2017, our rubric was in a cumbersome multi-page PDF. There was a different PDF form for each student practice assessment milestone, so faculty weren't really able to track growth as students matriculated through their degree programs. It was also a prescriptive rubric that was really more like a check the box, and it didn't allow for students to explore their personal interests in practice. In 2017, we redesigned the assessment process with a new rubric, now an Excel file, measuring and visualizing how and where students were demonstrating knowledge. The quantitative visualization fits onto one page and shows how students' prior knowledge and competency builds as they move through their degree program, gaining experience in work-based learning settings. There are also tabs at the bottom for faculty to include incremental qualitative feedback. Kelly worked with me to determine how to convert each of these BAC graduates' completed rubrics into a format that ensured all desired data was preserved and could be aggregated with demographic information from our student information system. Since the Excel rubric was designed with data in mind, the process of converting all our students' rubrics into this format only took a couple days. Automagically, as Kelly would say. Now I can begin to inquire about patterns. For example, why are our white and Hispanic students able to demonstrate knowledge in design implementation and professional project delivery at such a higher rate than our Black and Asian students? And what does it mean that our Black students are demonstrating knowledge in public interest design at a rate that is double all of our other students? Even better, Kelly has brought this comprehensive data into Tableau, an interactive data visualization software, so I can begin to ask even more questions and slice and dice the data any way I choose to look for equity gaps. For example, in 2017-2018, our Bachelor's of Architecture male students consistently had higher scores in criteria for creative thinking, critical thinking, applied learning, investigation, inquiry, and analysis, and problem solving. Is this a coincidence? I can look at all the data over many years from 2017 to present. On the right side, you can see how I'm able to manipulate the data that is visualized. Along the top, you can see different aspects of my program being measured, such as core competencies and concentration competencies, or score by subtype. I asked Kelly to show the data in these many ways, and we continue to add to the list. Through this inquiry, I see important insights that otherwise would have gone unnoticed. I see that between 2017 and 2021, our Bachelor's of Architecture female students consistently scored higher in the design implementation criteria for material, lighting, and FF&E selection. However, each year, Bachelor's of Architecture males outperformed females in demonstration of knowledge pertaining to construction administration, engineered systems, financial consideration, and technical construction documents. So now it's time for action. Create faculty dashboards where we can help build awareness for whether my practitioner faculty are evaluating the same student evidence differently by gender, race, or age. Additionally, by linking our student IDs with employers through our workplace affiliation data, I can also explore whether there is a bigger issue at play. Are our design firm partners more likely to offer certain professional experiences to males than females? How does gender, race, or age shape students' career choices in ways that are beyond their control. This is data in action. Thank you for listening. Please share your thoughts and questions in the chat. We welcome conversation and collaboration with each of you.
Oh, again, this is just terrific. It's so wonderful to see the variety of good assessment and very specific assessment that's being brought to the table. Thank you to all three of our presenters. For this last half hour, we're going to have a little bit of a conversation about what we've just seen and the questions that it raises for us. Mike, I'm going to ask you to join this conversation as well, along with our presenters from the three programs. And I'd like to open our discussion by throwing the mic back to our presenters again to ask you what you heard in the other two presentations that intrigued you or excited you. You taught us a lot of stuff tonight, but what did you learn?
Hi, Herb. Oh, no.
Go ahead. No,
Mike,
go
you want
ahead.
to come in? Okay. Yeah, I think that, I think that Mike, I'll just say, Michael, one thing that you mentioned in your presentation was this idea about kind of different types of assessment that is open, and it maybe there's data collection, or it's sort of has the potential to be aggregated, and then just this sort of open assessment that's just out there and there's not data collection in mind. And I guess that was an interesting thing to think about. And maybe, can you clarify, remind me again, because I might not have said that right. Tell me again what the X's and O's.
So the X's and O's in that represent, the O's represent indirect assessments, where we're looking at the impact of particular things in our curriculum or in our program, but we're not measuring specifically there. And I will say this comes out of a lot of conversations about within the faculty. We have a pretty high rate of our alumni who go on to become licensed, quite high comparatively, and we see, we know there's certain things that we do well, but we haven't been measuring them. So it sparked all these conversations about what should be measured and where it should be measured. And I think there's this, my experience, I mean, I was blown away at the sort of in-depth level of analysis and utilization of data that you're using at the BAC. It's incredible. That is definitely not the norm here. And if anything, as I said, there's this sort of cultural push against data to some degree, a real focus on, as I said, the course evaluations have moved away from any sort of numerical response to a qualitative focus. So that is data, and there's data that comes out of that, but it's not your traditional data. So that's just the context, but it was fantastic to see both of the presentations, and I learned a lot.
Yeah, Mike, I want to follow up on one of the things about your APR matrix. You had the courses listed against the program criteria and student criteria, but then you also had, and this is important, I think, a whole section of non-course, non-curricular things. Can you talk a little bit about what kinds of activities, what kinds of programming you were looking at as ways to fulfill the NAB criteria?
Yeah, I mean, we have, I think, something like 30 different things that emerged as we were going through our APR. And they varied from things like data on pass rates for the APR to the number of students attending mentoring sessions on practice. We have different student data points, demographic data points that we're looking at, just anything that provides information that's valuable in this process, we captured there. I can pull it up and give you more specifics, but it was in the beginning, I didn't know what would be there. And then as we went through the process and we're in discussion, as I said, across the university with, where do we look to assess success in different aspects of our program and curriculum? Anything that we're measuring in some way, whether directly or indirectly, we listed there.
Right. So what are you looking at there? Are you looking at patterns of participation? Are you looking at satisfaction with participation? How are you gauging what those activities are doing for you?
It varies for each one, right? So that's where that second spreadsheet becomes really important, where we can track what is our benchmark for something, what is going to be success.
Yeah.
So if one of the things we're looking at, we're based in Eugene, Oregon. We have a satellite in Portland, but we're based in Eugene, which does not have a huge practice environment. So engaging our students with the profession is something that is very different here than it is in Boston or Seattle. So it's one of the things that we saw through surveys and through discussion with our alumni who are out in the profession and our advisory group. We need to work on that. So we then discussed, okay, what are we doing? And what else can we do? And then what would we measure? So as I mentioned, we have these mentoring sessions where we bring in recent alumni who are in practice to talk to actually pair up with our students and work with them. And so we're looking at the participation rates, right? What are the number, how many students are doing that? How many are we offering? And then we'll evaluate, is that enough? But the sort of nebulous part right now is to say, well, what is success? How do we know when we've done enough? Because it's not a particular number. We don't yet know what's going to be the marker of success there.
Right.
Herb, I just wanted to follow up on the thought I had at the beginning, which was just commenting on that, the X's and O's in Michael's presentation, and just how, for us and the kind of culture of assessment. And I talked a little bit about it being bought, like we initially had a very prescribed, and I know we're in NAB, right? Like we just made this change from a prescribed list of student criteria and you kind of checking the boxes. And then some folks in the chat, it's this minimum level of competency that it's really measuring. And assessment can be something that is really embedded and just is part of everything that you're doing. So we have all of this robust data at the BAC and the work that I'm doing because it's embedded. I have every faculty member do it in it. They're in it every time they meet with a student, and it's with the student sees it. And I'm constantly trying to make it look better. I know I've got like a bad green right now. I have thousands of Excel files with a terrible green in it that I hate. But like, I think that it can be something that is very aspirational, right? And that you can see we're moving. And, I've been trying to figure out how to have this conversation with our firms, because Kelly has just been extraordinary to have. This dashboard, I'm going to have conversations with firms about the equity experiences that they're offering people. And I already had that data. Herb, you're familiar with it. I already have that data for salaries and pay. But I didn't know how to start this conversation. So the idea that we can use all this embedded culture of assessment to create awareness, like that's the goal, to change. And it should be fun. And not fun, but it shouldn't be so, and I always use this in the work I'm doing, constant, almost every day. It shouldn't feel like you're doing your taxes, right? It shouldn't feel like, there's so many forms and boxes and things I'm typing in this and that, and you got to send me this form and that form and this survey. It should not feel like you're doing your taxes, because then you're just not going to be able to do it. You're just not going to get it from everywhere so that you can see what is actually happening. And Kelly, I would love to give you an opportunity just to briefly speak, because I think the chat has a lot of this in it. But the qualitative assessment, and being able to use qualitative feedback for assessment, I think people would love to hear about that too, and how that can be helpful. If you have any thoughts on that.
So just a couple points. And I just wanted to mention what I loved about both what Michael was saying and what I heard in Rick's was this intentionality of what they were doing. And so, Michael, I think you were talking about thinking about targets and where you wanted to set those. And I really like how you approach that, because too often I think places will sort of brainstorm and say, well, this is what I see here. And I think it's really, thinking about your own institution and what matters for you and what's important for you and how you set those targets that really matters. And then of course the intentionality of the process that Rick went through. I really like that. I think what you were asking, Beth, was about how do you bring the qualitative part in? And I think that's, this idea of adding to the story where you can actually find out sort of more of the experiences of the people and getting that data in. And what I like about it, if you format it and you sort of curate it and capture it in a similar way to quantitative data, that you can quantify the qualitative data. So, using software or, not, to kind of go through and mine it for themes so that you can get a sense of, what are the overarching ideas happening here, and, who's saying what and how do those things sort of play out. So I like to look at, I think that what I call sort of thick data, it is really critical and does need to be curated so that it can be used. There's a lot of qualitative data out there, and it all collectively tells a story. So planning for it.
Yeah. One of the questions that's come up in the chat a couple times in different ways is thinking about assessment of things that go beyond architecture's traditional focus on studio work and preparation for professional practice. So if you can, talk a little bit about how you think specifically about assessment with regards to, say, history, theory, and criticism. How do you think about assessment with regards to your students' general education experience? How do you think about assessment more broadly than simply the kind of NAB list of criteria? And think about the full kind of array of things you put on the table for your students.
One of the reasons that we decided to implement these research studios and seminars as an alternative to the MArch thesis was partly for this reason, kind of to advance a culture of research in the department and also to be able to better assess that. I will say, and so we do have a number of assessment mechanisms for these studios and seminars that are research-based. I will say, however, that to date, because we've only been doing this for a couple of years, most of those research studios and seminars have been focused more on technical concerns. Mm-hmm. Although the intention is that they will also be based more in history and theory. And we actually have a very robust faculty, history and theory faculty. And so our hope is that we will do more research in those areas as well, and we will have the ability to assess those and track the progress.
Okay.
I'll just add that I think the HTC question is specifically very interesting and one that we really mulled over a lot. I'd love any other perspectives on this, but our students take courses in our Department of Art and Architectural History, some required courses, and then we have a number of electives that are offered. But this question of how do we assess success at an understanding of history and theory for an architectural student? And, some faculty, we actually have a culture here where all of our faculty are on reviews every term. So we're very engaged with the studio work that our students are doing. And it's again, part of this culture where we don't have grades, but we have a lot of, qualitative feedback for the students about their progress. And we had the thought that, maybe for HTC and for many other things, we should simply be looking at their studio work and saying, do we see evidence of this in the studio work, right? That's a tough thing to measure, right, from the studio, but it's an active conversation. It's we certainly came up with certain criteria, certain exams where we're measuring this and things like that, but I don't feel like it really captures the essence of what we should be looking at to assess this in our program.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that you've all talked about in different ways, and one of the things that NAB is really emphasizing in this iteration of the conditions is peer review. Having the professional community, having other educators looking over your shoulders. And you've talked in different ways about the ways you're doing that through your studio reviews, through your practice assessments. But a lot of our coursework is much more kind of a sealed box, right? We don't have guest critics in architectural history courses. We don't have guest critics often in technology courses. And so I'm wondering, how do we extend the culture? And I'll come back to that word in a minute. How do we extend the culture of having more eyes on students' work and more opportunity for creating informed judgment about how well our students are doing?
This partially addresses that, Herb. Something that we've discussed and planned to implement, but we haven't implemented it yet. And this would apply to non-studio coursework. And I think as we were discussing it, we were particularly thinking about history theory coursework, is having an outside peer review of course syllabi. Now, maybe student work as well, but at the very least, course syllabi, seeking out peers at peer institutions. And an interesting challenge here is how do we make this not feel like someone is looking over one's shoulder,
Right.
but instead, how do we encourage people to look at it as an opportunity to collaborate and to share what different folks have learned in the interest of improving teaching and improving student outcomes.
Yeah. Beth, you were going to add?
Well, I just think, Michael, I'm just focusing on like, how do we know if we're successful with the HTC courses? And yeah, I think it's the, it would be looking at studio, it would be looking at thesis, it would be, if a student self-directs and chooses to apply that, knowledge from those courses on their own, that's what we do. Like, that's what we do. Our culture of assessment is the student goes out and they learn, and then we have our direct assessment tools, the reflective essay, the portfolio, we've got, we get supervisor evaluations, all that gets evaluated. And then it's that evidence that we score, we grade the the competency, and we primarily use the level of awareness, integration, and synthesis. And so it's when the student does it, we're not there. And that we have lots of places that we give students the opportunity to demonstrate knowledge. And we don't tell them what it is that we're looking for them to demonstrate, right? We just say all of it kind of needs to add up to something. That's for us, how they get to their advanced skill level to graduate. But we don't say it has to add up. And this is like, these are the boxes you have to check. That's a big change that we made in 2017 that I think really transformed the way that we engage with the assessment rubric. And it's getting to where it doesn't feel like the taxes. And that was a big part of it, because we can open up to, emerging practice. Students can go in it whatever direction they want. And then whatever they bring back, we measure. And, in this case, you saw our service learning. I mean, our service learning public interest design is actually quite low for our work, which is really, it's surprising to me. What do I do about it? I got to do something about that. And that's because that's what they brought back to me, was that.
So I want to unpack this word culture that we've used quite a lot of times tonight. When we think about culture, we're thinking about a shared language, we're thinking about a shared attitude, we're thinking about shared beliefs, we're thinking about shared practices. How have you tried to build community around what can sometimes be seen as a contentious enterprise, sometimes can be seen as judgmental or looking over your shoulder? How have you specifically tried to build culture around this and increased sort of participation and eagerness?
I mean, I could speak a little bit to that. In terms of my experience from the data side, I think there is that attitude of approaching things without judgment and without, what's happening, without being punitive, but rather, the curiosity and finding out what's happening. And so I've found that building that culture, first of all, again, it's from a data point of view that we have to let people see and have and explore the data. That's one part of it, is they have to have that so that they can access it, and they have to be able to trust that. So I think there's a real trust factor in trusting the data, and then trusting that the work that you're going to do, first of all, will be supported by leadership. So if we're going to be working on something and we find something that needs to be changed, or we need to do something about it, there have to be the resources available to do that. So sort of being surrounded by it. So to say we've got a problem and it's contentious and we need to do something about it, but not providing the resources or the support to do that, that's not helpful. So providing that support.
Right.
Making sure that we're reallocating resources. And I think the other thing is when people see that changes are happening, they can see change, they can see that action is being taken, they can see that things are happening. And I think showing that, if we're able to do this and you can just make an impact on one or two students, how that will then impact all the way through. So just really bringing it to the heart of what matters to the people who are being involved.
Yeah, we're a pretty collegial faculty. We get along pretty well. I think that one of the things that we've strived to do is to emphasize that this is really about increasing transparency within the curriculum. Yes, we're doing this because we have to fulfill these NAB requirements, but what it can really yield is increased transparency within our curriculum and an increased sense of collaboration. And I don't think some of the resistance comes from the fact that I think we are a somewhat risk-averse department. We often will resist trying new things for fear that they won't work. And the tight time frame has actually been really helpful, because we don't have time to sit around and worry about whether or not these things are going to work. We just have to implement things and see how well they work. Something that I think has really helped us, though, is the broader context that I mentioned. One was the restructuring of our MARC curriculum 3 years ago. Well, it went on for 3 years, and then we actually did it 3 years ago. But that was the first time we've substantially restructured our curriculum in about 20 years. And an important part of that conversation was increased collaboration, increased integration between Design Studio and other coursework. So that kind of began this cultural conversation. The other thing that's really helped is the college strategic framework, which is all about interdisciplinary collaboration and building a sense of trust and community. So the broader context has actually really helped, I think, in our conversation.
Yeah.
I'll say one thing for culture, and it's really rooted in people and Kelly, and this is also rooted in equity-minded assessment. Your students. So students should be seeing everything that you're using to assess them. I love, Kelly said it, like, don't do anything about me without me. If your students go cross-eyed because they're looking at all the things that you're, like, how you're assessing this stuff, is the the culture it's not a culture of assessment, right? It's just sort of, it's a lot of stuff. So students see it and they're learning from it. So for us, we made it graphic. It's like a graphic map, and we could say, okay, there's all this white space. Where do you want to go next? What do you want to do next? And then it's a conversation. So we're measuring what they've demonstrated, but then we're also talking about what more they want to do, or what they thought they could do, but they didn't. And it's all because the students' eyes are on it every time we're looking at it. So students should see it. And that's part of equity-minded assessment, is involving the students in the process of assessment.
Yeah. I want to throw one last question out from the chat. I'm going to unfortunately have to ask you to be pretty brief about this, but none of us have infinite resources. None of us have infinite patience. None of us have infinite workload, but we have to start somewhere. So in each of your cases, how did you prioritize like the most important questions that you wanted to ask? What was your low-hanging fruit that you thought was crucial to get done first?
Herb, I'm going to pop in. I didn't respond to culture, but it sort of ties into this a little bit, because I was, in a department of engineering for just under 3 years. And then I moved here, basically, what was that, like 6 months before our APR was due. So that helped, because I have I'm new, so I could sort of, but I also have a certain history here. So that helped in terms of getting faculty on board, because there is, every place has its own culture as you were saying, in relationship to everything. And the culture here is one, as I've sort of said, that is, I would say, somewhat resistant to what is perceived as that tax form that Beth is referring to. There's this incredible and immediate response to anything that is sort of numerically based. So I've had, I think, some success in getting people on board, basically with a conversation that's saying, we want to understand what we're doing successfully and what we can improve. And that's something that anyone who's a faculty member can understand that and buy into that, right? And then the question is, where can you get engaged and find a place in part of that? So, for us, it was really, the first step was stepping back and talking about who we are, what do we do well, and how do we know we do that well, right? And that began this really interesting conversation of the perspectives. We actually have a very senior faculty. We only have one assistant professor right now. Everyone else is tenured on our faculty. We're in the midst of some changes. And so there's a very strong sense of them, of who we are, but bringing in the perspective of practitioners, which I immediately started doing, going out and meeting with firms and talking to our alumni and places that are hiring our students, to bring back that perspective, which was unbelievably valuable and gave us a lot of momentum to say, okay, yes, we're doing certain things well, we need to figure out how we measure that we are doing that well, and assess whether we're doing that well and where we're doing it well and where we're not. But also where we see that where firms are telling us we probably need to be looking to improve, that was incredibly valuable at helping us direct towards things we need to look at. And then the student self-assessment survey that we put together, that was unbelievably valuable also. That provided sort of places for us to focus on. So yeah. I think responding to the inputs was sort of how we started.
Okay, great. All right, well, we're at 8:30, and I know that Mike has a couple last minute things he'd like to share with us. Before I get off, though, I want to say thank you to all four of our presenters. I learned a ton. I have all kinds of new tools in my own toolbox that I can carry away. This has been really, really terrific. Thank you all so much. And Mike?
Thanks, Herb. I just want to let everyone know that we have a workshop planned in February that's focusing on the framework of the 2020 conditions. You can register for that on the ACSA website. It's like our other workshops that have a fee. They're intended to bring schools together, so you can bring more than one person to participate in the workshop. You do some breakout sessions together. You can also work in cohorts. It's a good way to kind of get things out on the table and share things, as well as interact with Herb, both during the session and after it. So that's a good opportunity for everyone. And I think in closing, I want to thank Herb, Kelly, Beth, Michael, and Rick. You did a wonderful job. And thanks to the audience for your questions. And we should have the recording posted on the ACSA website. We're shooting to have it up by the end of the week. So thanks very much, everyone. Have a good evening.
Thank you all so much.
Thanks, Herb. Thanks, Michael. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all.
Bye.